Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. In this video, I'm going to be looking at the week starting on Monday, December the 23rd, 2024. And a big part of this video is preview. So I want to give a preview of the main events coming up over the course of the week. Of course, the main astrological events and what they might mean and how I see them. And having done this preview, I want to look at the horoscope of Keir Starmer. It's not a chart that we're unfamiliar with, and he is Prime Minister of the UK, but I do feel it can take a bit of time to really get to grips with a chart. And Starmer's chart, I don't have a time of birth, so it is a difficult chart to work out without that time of birth. And so what I'm just trying to do is relate that chart to who he is and get some clues. And I'm not there yet, I don't think. Again, it's because I don't have that time of birth. Now, Keir Starmer is turning out to be a very bad Prime Minister. He's only been in power for six months, less than 6 months. And already the government seems to be falling apart. Although they have such a big majority, they can be in power for the next 4 years. So it's kind of a bit of a zombie government. It's kind of dead, but it's not dead, and it can keep going for 4 years. So there is a bit of a problem there, and he's been getting prominence because of this song that's been doing quite well in the UK charts, called Freezing This Christmas by Sir Starmer and the Granny Harmers. And this song highlights the fact that cold weather payments have been removed from pensioners in the UK, and this is a hugely controversial issue. It seems that pensioners are potentially going to die because of this, and this single act has caused a huge amount of harm to the government. And having looked at Keir Starmer, I'll do an I Ching reading for the week. So I can cast the coins and then look at the week ahead from the perspective of the I Ching. So let's start off by looking at the main events this week. So here is the chart for the beginning of the week, for midnight on Monday, December the 23rd, set for New York. So the week starts with Sun quintile Saturn. You can see that the Sun and Saturn are 72 degrees apart, and Sun quintile Saturn is a minor aspect. It's not particularly important, and it's perhaps about the impressions we are trying to give, not just us, other people. Sun quintile Saturn. There is an atmosphere of seriousness, and the Sun is, of course, now in Capricorn, so it's in the sign of it's in the sign of Saturn, quintile Saturn. So I think people are trying to give the impression that things are serious, and maybe they don't want to be too ostentatious, and maybe that's a sign of the times. And so in terms of ourselves and the best way of using Sun quintile Saturn, try one's hardest to be disciplined. Maybe some of us have an idea about what discipline means and what seriousness means, and we might be making a special effort to demonstrate this in terms of our behavior, what we say, and perhaps even what we wear. Then Christmas Eve, the 24th. This sees a square aspect between Jupiter and Saturn. And the Jupiter and Saturn square is, I believe, a very important aspect. It's not that necessarily anything is going to happen on Tuesday directly related to Jupiter square Saturn, but it says where we are in the economic cycle. And I think I talked about this in my last video, that it's a time of crisis, but a crisis that's not necessarily a bad crisis. It's the first crisis since the new moon, but since Jupiter conjunct Saturn in 2020, at the end of 2020. Sure, we've had other crises. We've had COVID. We've had, Ukraine is this ongoing crisis. But with Jupiter square Saturn, the meaning of that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction is starting to crystallize, and maybe in an economic sense as well. And I'm inclined to think that this Jupiter square Saturn economically may turn out to be quite positive. Things do seem difficult at the moment, but I believe in the US we've got questions about government spending and whether Congress is going to support government expenditure. I think they just have voted that they are going to allow expenditure, and so a government shutdown has been avoided. But these kind of things happen when Jupiter is square Saturn. I've looked at Jupiter square Saturn before, and I'm going to look at Jupiter square Saturn in a few days' time. I mean, a principle of Jupiter Saturn is Jupiter represents expansion, Saturn represents restriction. And so when they're in square, those two principles are at odds with each other. Jupiter represents spending, and it represents growth. Saturn represents cost cutting. It represents restriction. It can represent recession. So I suppose if you're running an economy, those two principles of Jupiter and Saturn, we always have to think about it. But it may say something about our own personal lives as well. Jupiter square Saturn, there are things we want to do, there are things we want to achieve, but we're also aware of the limitations upon us. And then on Christmas Day, the 25th, we have Sun quincunx Mars. Sun is 150 degrees from Mars. You can see this in the chart. The Sun will be at around 4 degrees Capricorn. Mars will be at around 4 Leo, 150 degree aspect. Sun and Mars are both fairly egotistical male planets. Sun quincunx Mars, could be disagreements, could be arguments around the Christmas table perhaps. Is it going to be a peaceful Christmas? I don't know. I mean, when I do a video for Christmas in a couple of days' time, I'll look at that in detail. But certainly Sun quincunx Mars doesn't help. And it may be a real battle for us to assert ourselves, or some people might feel it has to be like that. Then, moving on towards the end of the week, on Thursday we have got Mercury opposition Saturn. Friday we have got Thursday we've got Mercury opposition Jupiter. Friday we've got Mercury square Saturn. So that means that we have a T-square coming up over the week. Mercury opposition Jupiter, and then Mercury square Saturn. So you're going to have Saturn on the T. Now, I would probably see that Mercury as triggering the Mercury-Saturn square. So everything I just said about the Mercury-Saturn square gets rekindled by Mercury. And so issues about progress and restriction are going to really come to the fore. And Mercury might be very ambitious, might want to make things happen, might want to move, but Saturn is going to restrict it. And Mercury square Saturn can be about harsh language and not being very happy, perhaps being a little bit negative. So is it going to be a happy Christmas with Mercury moving towards the square of Saturn? I think with Mercury square Saturn this Christmas, I think we're going to be very aware of everything that may be restricting us. And I think we can try to be enthusiastic with Mercury opposition Jupiter, trying our hardest to enjoy ourselves, to enjoy Christmas, but Mercury square Saturn as well. So I think in a general sense over Christmas, there's going to be a certain cloud there, I think. We can enjoy ourselves, but we're just concerned about the future. And I think that is because that Jupiter-Saturn square is really dominating proceedings. And then the end of a week on the 29th, December the 29th, we have got Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus. So there is Uranus and 23, 24 Taurus. So the Sun will be about sort of 8, 9 Capricorn. So hard aspect between Sun and Uranus. It represents events. There's a certain tension there, and a feeling that something might happen. We may even want to make it happen. And so we do have to be cautious with that Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus. Things might not happen as expected, and plans for Christmas and a New Year. We shouldn't necessarily assume that everything is going to work as expected. And by the end of a week with that Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus, we might perhaps get thrown off course. But some people are going to be impacted by it more than others. So if you've got planets at 23 fixed, then that might have a special impact on you. And of course, if you're a famous person, then that Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus might be something we need to be looking at. And so Christmas is of course a tense time. It tends to be when family tensions are at their peak, and with that Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus, I think we need to watch out for it. So the weekend needs some caution. And then I want to look at the horoscope of Keir Starmer. So here is Keir Starmer's horoscope. And the question I ask about Keir Starmer's chart is, why is it turning out so badly for him? I don't have a time of birth for him, which is really irritating. But it's kind of typical with someone like Keir Starmer not having a time of birth. It kind of fits, doesn't it? So he's born September the 2nd, 1962, and I have to say at noon in Southwark, which is a part of London. And so the first thing we have to notice about Keir Starmer's chart is he has no fire. That's something we can most certainly say. So fire is about inspiration. It's about making connections. It's about having a vision. So if in a UK context, if you want to see examples of politicians with their sons in fire signs, you've got Nigel Farage or George Galloway. Nigel Farage, whatever you think of him, he has a clear vision about what Britain should be. He has a feeling for it. I mean, his vision might be not to your taste, but clearly he's inspired by something. Or George Galloway, the Scottish politician, former, he was a Labour MP, but he's sometimes gets elected as an independent, or as for his Respect Party. He doesn't stay in Parliament for long, but both George Galloway and Nigel Farage are very inspirational figures, and they're very good speakers. But Keir Starmer, there just seems to be something missing. And it's often said that Keir Starmer doesn't have a plan, that he doesn't have a vision. And that may be connected with the fact that he has no planets in fire signs, except the North Node in Leo. But, everyone's got North Node in Leo, haven't they? Well, I've got the North Node in Leo anyway. I mean, it's not a big deal having the North Node in Leo. And so here you have a Virgo with no planets in fire. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a Virgo, but it may be that Keir Starmer perhaps embodies some of the potential problems about being a Virgo. And every sign has its problems. So I'm not trying to single out Virgo, but if you take a stereotypical textbook Virgo, you'd say, well, Virgos like to focus on the details. They sometimes miss out on the big picture. And if you've got no fire, it's very difficult to see the big picture. You just focus on the details, one detail at a time, and you perhaps use details to justify what you're doing or what you're not doing. And if you are a politician, your job is to inspire your country with a vision, and Keir Starmer is not able to do it. And it may just be as simple as Sun in Virgo with no planets in fire. And the criticism of Keir Starmer is quite intense. I was looking at a video by by a channel called Novara Media. Novara Media is pretty left wing, and it was a really effective video in terms of attacking him. And I think it had an interview with what interview? It was talking about Diane Abbott, a sort of another politician who was commenting on him, and who's mentioned that he just doesn't understand politics. He can't do it. You need a certain something to do politics, and Keir Starmer doesn't have it. And yes, he's getting criticised by the left and the right, so it's not just some right-wing critics of him. And clearly, withdrawing the winter fuel payment for old age pensioners was a major mistake. It might have been technically and financially seemed to be the right thing to do, but you do need to have a certain sense of judgment, and it seems that he perhaps doesn't have judgment, and judgment can be quite a fiery thing. Fire just, you get it, you get the overall picture, and that does seem to be a problem for him. And that Sun conjunct Pluto is really intense, and the Sun conjunct Pluto is, we don't know, although we don't know his time of birth, I think we can certainly say that Sun conjunct Pluto is pretty exact. It could be as early, his Sun could be as early as 9 degrees Virgo, which would be less than a degree from Pluto. It could be as late as 10 degrees Virgo, which would be exactly conjunct Pluto. So it is very much there. And so Sun conjunct Pluto in his case could be simply power for the sake of power. And in terms of his background, he was a lawyer, a successful lawyer, and he was, I think, director of public prosecutions. And the point this video that Novara Media made is that he never really had to put in the effort to get elected. He was just parachuted into a safe seat. So he didn't have that struggle. Normally, I suppose, the route for members of parliament is that, they start off with seats that are impossible to take, but they get experience of campaigning, doorstepping, and all that kind of stuff, and they learn the craft of being a politician. But if you are just parachuted onto a safe seat, you never have to learn it. So that can make him somewhat out of touch. And yeah, he is something also of an apparatchik. He has just he gives that appearance of being a lawyer, being a bureaucrat, doing what is right, and making sure the details are all sorted out. And that comes perhaps with Sun conjunct Pluto, and that might be everything that it's about. Now, his moon is in Libra. He's got Libra planets, so you would think that with those Libra planets that he would have some sense of the human dimension. Would we really think that? Libra, what is Libra? Libra is an air sign. Libra is, I suppose, trying to be civilized. It's trying to do what's right. And I suppose it's also about trying to make the right connections and keeping people happy and keeping the right people happy. It's not about keeping everyone happy. It's about keeping enough people happy. And that may be how his Libra is working. Now, as far as the emotional side of things is, he has Mars in Cancer. And Mars in Cancer can often be very defensive. I mean, Mars does not work too well in Cancer. I mean, it is fallen in Cancer, although it does have triplicity rulership. Mars does rule the water signs. And so if you take the view that Mars rules the water signs, then it certainly has some dignity in Cancer. But still, Mars in Cancer can be very defensive. And in terms of how he behaves in interviews, he was given, I think, £75,000 worth of free clothes, and he was interviewed about it, and he was very exact about it. But in terms of defending it, well, he didn't break the rules. That's Sun in Virgo. If we didn't break the rules, it's okay. But then Mars in Cancer, there is a defensiveness to him. I mean, Mars is trine Jupiter. I mean, that Mars trine Jupiter is kind of interesting because we don't normally see that. Mars trine Jupiter, we see that as being high energy. I mean, he's got Jupiter in Pisces. I suppose Jupiter in Pisces, relatively strong Jupiter, is about what he believes in. So maybe at some level he's got some beliefs, but Mars trine Jupiter, I suppose he makes some effort to sort of pursue them. But Mars trine Jupiter may be about how he uses his energy in other ways which we perhaps don't know about. And it's possibly a good idea to look at Keir Starmer's chart from the viewpoint of the 90-degree dial. It sort of gives a sort of more precise view and might highlight a few oddities in his chart. So if we put Keir Starmer's chart on the 90-degree dial, so remember, 90-degree dial, conjunctions, oppositions, and squares are all coming over as all shown as conjunctions. Semi-squares and sesquiquadrates are shown as oppositions. So there is his Sun-Pluto conjunction. And so I thought it would be interesting to see what midpoints midpoints the Sun and Pluto are on. And so this Sun-Pluto conjunction does pick up on the Mars-Hades and the Mars-Neptune midpoint. So Hades, he has a Hades-Neptune hard aspect. So Hades represents perhaps the seamier side of life, things which are dark and hidden and might be somewhat unpleasant. And so he's got Neptune and Hades making a hard aspect. I mean, anyone born in 1962 has got this. I've got this as well. So Neptune Hades is not in itself especially important, but in terms of symmetry, he's got Mars. He's got Mars here. So the Sun and Pluto pick up on the Mars Hades and the Mars Neptune midpoint. Now, this might be hinting at a darker side to Keir's life, something that is not immediately apparent, and it may be something that's motivating him or bothering him that we just can't see. So that's one aspect of his chart, and so that's Sun Pluto. Also his Uranus. He does seem to be someone who has close connections with people, and those connections can fall apart quite quickly, maybe. So if you look at his Uranus, he has Uranus on the Venus-Mars midpoint. So Uranus on the Venus-Mars midpoint, that may say nothing about his life as a politician. I mean, Venus-Mars can be about relationships. It can sometimes be about falling in love and out of love with people very quickly. That can be passing attractions and very strong at the time, and then they can fade. So that can be Uranus on the Venus-Mars midpoint, which he certainly has. Although it may also say something about his supposed charisma. He doesn't have a great deal of charisma. He's not a charismatic politician. And with that Venus-Mars, that may say something about his public image, Uranus on a Venus-Mars midpoint. How quickly it has fallen, maybe, with Uranus conjunct the Venus-Mars midpoint. So there is a lot to say about Keir Starmer, which I don't want to go on and on about it, but I also think it's interesting that he has Uranus on the Mercury Admetos midpoint. Admetos is a planet of delay, something being held back. Mercury Admetos is perhaps a principle of trying to say something but not really doing a good job of it. And so perhaps with Uranus on the Mercury Admetos midpoint, that says something about his attempts to be charismatic, his attempts to be popular, and his attempts to create a dramatic impression. But somehow he just can't quite see it through. So, those are a few comments about Keir Starmer. His lack of fire, I think, is maybe as simple as that. Now, Boris Johnson had no fire in his chart. So Boris Johnson, when he was on good form, was very effective. He was a very effective campaigner. He was an effective politician. He was mayor. He knew about campaigning. He'd been mayor of London. He was elected mayor of a left-wing city, which in itself was quite an achievement. So how does Boris Johnson get away with it with no fire in his chart? And I think when you're dealing with elements, things can work in different ways. Some people have no fire in their chart and they don't want it. They don't know how to integrate it. They try and avoid it. And that may be Keir Starmer. He's just not a fiery person and he makes no effort to compensate. You could say that with Boris Johnson, I know he crashed and burnt in the end, but it's almost like he wanted fire. And this is something you can have with people with no fire. People with no fire in their charts, they can be very larger than life. They can be exaggeratedly larger than life because they're trying hard to integrate it. And so that might be how Boris Johnson is working. Also, Boris Johnson is a Gemini. Keir Starmer is a Virgo. And maybe Boris Johnson was really leveraging his Gemini planets and really projecting his Gemini planets. And clearly, Boris Johnson was not a details person, and he liked to give this impression of bumbling along and saying clever things. And maybe he was able to get away with it and just give the impression that he had some kind of vision. I don't think Boris Johnson actually did have a vision. Fundamentally, I don't think Boris Johnson had much fire in his chart. You associate Boris Johnson with Brexit, but I think Boris Johnson made a logical decision about whether or not to support Britain being part of the European Union, and it was done in a logical way. It was not done in a inspired way, not like Nigel Farage. So it was all very airy, with all his air planets, 4 planets in air signs, and so. He went through with Brexit, but just didn't have a clear idea about how it was going to work, what Britain's future was. He talked a lot, but I think fundamentally in his heart, I don't think that was his vision. And clearly, with Keir Starmer, we see a person who does not appear to have any vision. It's not a vision that he's really able to communicate. And so now I want to look at this week, final section of this video. I want to consider this week from a viewpoint of the I Ching. So I do have to remind you, if you don't want your I Ching to be read, you don't have to have it read, and you can just stop the video. You should not have an oracle forced upon you. So assuming you want your I Ching done, this I Ching is going to have 4 sections. General section, then I'm going to look at money, then career, and then relationships. So I asked the question, what is the week starting on Monday, December the 23rd, 2024, going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was after completion. So after completion gives us the idea of obviously something completed. We have made a transformation. We've crossed the river and it's new territory. And I suppose we might feel that, over the weekend we had the winter solstice. The sun moved into Capricorn. And so that was a transition. You could say that certainly in the northern hemisphere, the hours of light are now increasing. And of course in the southern hemisphere, they're now decreasing. And so we've moved to something else. We've moved to the far bank. Then now what? And that is the problem. Now what? What do we do? And this hexagram after completion is often about the chaos that happens after a change is being made. It so often happens, doesn't it? We make a change. We're very pleased with ourselves for making the change. And then the question is, now what? Maybe we don't know what to do. And it can be at that moment where we feel we've been successful that things start to disintegrate. And that is perhaps the problem here. And we have 2 moving lines, and the bottom line moves. And the bottom line is saying that as soon as we've made the transition, as soon as we've made the change, things start to go wrong. We find we can't actually make progress. We get stuck in mud, and that's part of the imagery. You have a carriage trying to progress through mud. Maybe it's like, I don't know, we've arrived at the far bank, but it's kind of firm ground, but not quite. There's still a lot of mud there, and we can't really move off the bank, and we have to stay where we are. And I suppose you might think a bit, if you want to look at it in military terms, I suppose after completion, something like the D-Day landings or whatever, you land your troops on the far beach, on the far side of the English Channel or the river or whatever, and that's where your problems start. That's when you potentially come under attack. And can you get off the beachhead? Maybe not. Can you even create a beachhead? So that's perhaps the issue we've got here. And in the first instance, we have to perhaps stop and review the situation. Is this going to work? Can we progress any further? And then the 5th line moves, and the 5th line is really telling us, it's not such a bad line, by the way, but it's telling us to keep it simple. We can take control of the situation, but we mustn't have big ideas. It's enough for us to have made a change. That's all we can do. To actually progress further is going to be hard work, at least in the short term. So there's a new dawn, but taking advantage of that new day, not yet, I don't think. And so we've got 2 moving lines, and so that means we do move to a different hexagram, and the hexagram we move to is hexagram 36, darkening of the light. And that really does emphasize the point that, yeah, we might have made a change, but short term, nothing is going to happen. Nothing can happen. And we're not going to be recognized. It's going to be very difficult for us to show our talents, and we just might feel somewhat ignored, and people aren't going to be interested in what we have to say. And so if you want anyone to listen short term, then you may be disappointed. And so perhaps we just get the image of having made a change, we've made the change, and that's it. no more progress in the short term, and we just have to just wait it out. And things will change in the end. Just because the light is darkened, it doesn't mean that it's the end of the world. We just have to. Indeed, it's probably best that we actually hide our light. It's not a time when we should be showing the world what we can do. We might be revealing too much. So if you look at the week in general, it's not a week for fireworks. We've made a change, but that's it. That's enough, and we need to just hold on to what we've got, and not get involved in anything dramatic, and not show off, not boast, not talk about our plans, keep a low profile. So it's that kind of week. Now, as far as money is concerned, 63 after completion, if money is a concern to you, it may be that you have made some changes financially recently, and you've I don't know, maybe you've reorganized your money, or you've been trying to reorganize your money, or you may have just had insights about money, and you've had these insights, and that was good, and you want to perhaps see things through, and you're not able to see things through. It's not a week where you're going to get great financial progress. It's enough perhaps to have made a decision. Okay, you've made that decision. It was a big decision, and in a sense it was crossing the river. But to actually see any results of that decision, I think that's perhaps unlikely. And there is a danger of trying to see through any financial initiatives that you might be taking, because with that first line moving, you might get stuck very quickly, really quickly get stuck, and you find you can't do anything, and you need to stop what you're doing. So if you're in the middle of something financially, and I suppose maybe it's sort of Christmas and New Year, it's not perhaps a time for making dramatic financial moves. Maybe you should just pause and wait for the situation to improve. Now, the fifth line does move, though, and the fifth line is about frugality, and you don't have to make a big sacrifice, and that's what the I Ching is. What the I Ching does say, it makes a comparison between a rich group of people and a poorer group of people. So the rich group of people, they're able to make extravagant sacrifices. And I'm not talking about sacrifices, really. I'm talking about perhaps things you want to do over Christmas. Some people, they spend a lot of money on Christmas, or they spend a lot of money at the end of the year. And because they're trying to create an impact, they're trying to create a show. That may be part of it. But you don't have to make a show. Something very small is enough. So I suppose in terms of Christmas gifts, Christmas gestures, it's the gesture that counts. It's not the money behind it. You do not have to be extravagant, and so I think that's all you have to do. All you have to think about. So if you are thinking about money, there's not a great deal that you have to do. It's certainly not a time where you have to spend money. There's no obligation to spend money. So, I think you might feel an obligation to spend money, and perhaps you're looking at how other people are spending money, but you don't have to do that. You can actually be pretty frugal, and so I think that is a good thing. Then this hexagram, it transitions to the to darkening of the light, and darkening of the light may mean several things. You might, for example, have financial advice to offer, in which case I don't think anyone's going to listen to you. That's a possibility. So anything you have to say about money, even if you know your stuff really well, even if you know that you're 100% right, then I don't think people are going to listen. That is a possibility. They're not going to understand that you have something really valuable to offer. Darkening of the light also indicates that you should make no attempt to show off your money. This is a time to be keeping a financially low profile. Nothing you do should indicate the money you have. Absolutely nothing. So do keep a financially low profile. Don't spend money. Particularly don't spend money in an ostentatious way. And other people might want to, but I don't think you have to. So it seems to be quite simple what you need to do. Now, if you've got big financial aims this week, you want to accomplish a lot financially, then I don't think you will, with darkening of the light. And if you've got financial abilities, I'd probably just keep them to yourself. You can perhaps be more open about them at a later stage. Turning to career and business, of course, I do understand that this is a time of year when people often don't work or they're winding down. And so after completion, that may just be saying what we already know. It may just be saying after completion, the year is over, the working year is over, there's nothing more to be said. And if you do try to do anything work-wise, I'm not convinced you're going to make very much progress. The first line of this hexagram talks about getting stuck in the mud, not being able to progress. And so that may just be the fact that it's Christmas, it's a new year, people are not in the mood for doing anything, and you just have to accept that. So that's the bottom line. That's the bottom line moving. And the fifth line does move, though. And so it's suggesting that you should not be doing nothing. It does indicate that there are things that you can do in a sort of a career setting or a business setting which can be useful. They're not dramatic, they're quite modest, but if you work at it and you do your best, but again it's important not to be dramatic about it, then you can make a little bit of progress. So I don't think it's a complete nothing this week as far as career and business. I think that you just have to keep a relatively low profile, especially when we think that this hexagram after completion it moves to hexagram 36, which is darkening of the light. So darkening of the light means, whatever plans you have, whatever ideas you have, there's no real point in revealing them. I don't think they'll be appreciated. And if you've got any good advice to give, I don't think anyone will care. But I think we knew this already. It's kind of reflects the time of year that we're in. And finally, there is relationships. So relationships, I don't know what's going on. Different people have different relationships, but it does seem, in terms of relationships after completion, that there has perhaps been a recent change in a relationship you might be involved in, or perhaps a recent change in terms of your attitude to relationships. And you might see this as being quite a fortunate change, and something perhaps that you need to pursue further, that you need to develop on. But after completion is talking about a time when there appears to be progress, but now progress has been made, one has to deal with the consequences of it. So it might actually mean that certain relationships, having undergone a change, start to become chaotic again. And with that bottom line, the bottom line is suggestive of just not being able to move any further. You might be tempted to get closer to someone. You've already made progress with a person, but you try to get closer and you just get bogged down very quickly. And so whatever the state of your various relationships, don't try to go any further with it. And If another person is trying to go further with you, then I don't think this is a good thing. I think we need to keep things simple, and we need to keep things as they are. And then we do get a fifth line moving, and the fifth line is actually quite a fortunate line. And the fifth line is indicating that if we're trying to impress someone, then we don't have to do much. It's the gesture that counts. Spending a lot of money on trying to impress someone is just pointless. It won't make any difference. So something small but something sincere and heartfelt is enough. And then the final hexagram, the hexagram we move to, is the darkening of the light. And I think in terms of relationships, there may be a certain sense in which you feel that you're not being particularly appreciated. The real you is not being understood, and you find it difficult to be yourself in terms of one-to-one relationships. This is not a bad reflection on the other person, by the way. It's just the way things are at the moment. So it may be best to, keep a low profile, not even think that relationships are particularly important. It is a time, darkening of the light, where we do need to keep quiet about who we are. If we reveal our true selves, we reveal, what we can do, it just might not be appreciated, and we might sort of have negative feelings about it. So if you do get those negative feelings, if you don't feel appreciated with darkening of the light, don't worry. It's only a temporary situation. And that's it. Those are my that's my I Ching forecast, and that's all I've got to say for this week. I hope you appreciated this video. I won't say I hope you liked this video, because I suppose this video was a little bit downbeat. And still, if you did enjoy this video, I suppose if you liked the video, I would appreciate it. And if you're not subscribed and you want to subscribe, I would be very grateful. If you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks very much for watching, and I will talk to you again very soon.